In December 1914, Field Marshal Sir John French warned that he only had enough ammunition for scarcely 1 hour's bombardment of a small portion of the enemy's lines. By May, the national press was scandalized by the lack of munitions. The Times wrote, "Men died in heaps upon Aubers Ridge because the field guns were short of high explosive shells." Steps had to be taken. A new coalition government was formed to improve British fortunes, and Lloyd George was charged with the heavy responsibility of ensuring that the British Armed Services had enough ammunition to win the war. He set out a great programme, converting existing factories to war work and building new factories. His greatest project was undoubtedly HM Factory Gretna, which was 9 miles long by 2 miles wide. But why was this area chosen? In the first place, there were excellent rail connections with the Glasgow and South Western, the Caledonian and the North British Rail Companies, feeding into the locality. Another very important reason for siting the factory in this western corner of the Scottish border was the relative safety of the area from German air attack. Shielded by the Cheviots, Pennines and Cumbrian mountains, they were outside the ranges of German planes and Zeppelins, which terrorised more vulnerable parts of Britain. What's more, this quiet, sparsely populated rural area had an abundance of open space to contain a factory 9 miles long. With the danger of explosion high, the buildings had to be spaced out and separated by earth mounds following the dispersal principle. Although the rural area had its benefits, there was a shortage of local labour and housing to accommodate the workers who would be needed. Thousands of women and men had to be drafted in from all over to meet incredibly tight building deadlines and the insatiable demand of the factory for higher production. The poem The Gretna Girls pays tribute to the lasses who left their homes to work at the factory. 12,000 Gretna girls were to work in this colossal factory. They and the other 18,000 construction and process men had to be housed. Local towns Annan, Carlisle, Lockerbie, Langham and Dumfries could only lodge so many. There was local housing apart from a few cottages and farmhouses. There was Gretna Green, a small romantic village, but no Gretna township itself. There was the small parish of Dornoch, with a few hundred inhabitants, but Eastriggs was just the farmhouse of Eastriggs, which is still a dwelling house today. At first, navvies were accommodated in huge rows of huts, which earned Gretna the name Timber Town. The later huts were quite substantial buildings, and a few have survived as comfortable houses even today. The cost of imported timber, however, was too costly, and it was cheaper to use brick. The government made a bold move to create 2 permanent townships, although they hoped the war would be over in a short time. Top-rank architects Courtney, Crickmer and Raymond Unwin were employed to design the new model villages of Gretna and Eastriggs, and the houses themselves. Crickmer and Unwin were leading members of the Garden City movement, and they designed the new townships to these principles. Well set out streets with simple but pleasing design were to establish the basis of future public housing after the war. Most of the buildings were long blocks of hostels. These were especially designed so they could be converted into terraced housing when the fighting stopped. The red brick houses, common south of the border in Cumbria, is quite unusual for Scottish towns. The police barrack buildings in Gretna have been converted into flats, while in Eastriggs, Nelson House Hostel is now a community centre and pavilion. Individual houses for high-ranking workers were also designed, such as here on the Ridge and on a grander scale at Glasgow Road, Gretna. Senior management stayed out of town on the back roads near Redkirk, with electric light and indoor sanitation. Eastriggs and Gretna were the most modern settlements you could get in Scotland. A feature of the design was the cul-de-sac with houses on 3 sides of a small square, such as the Rand Square Eastriggs. The existing trees were used to form Melbourne Avenue. Where a flourishing avenue existed, a new generation of trees has been planted. In an age when government did not see its job to provide facilities, the Ministry of Munitions might have been expected to regard their responsibility to the workers to stop at providing good housing. But no, the welfare of the workers was made paramount. Every social, religious and educational need of the 30,000 workers here was catered for. Shops were built in Eastriggs and Gretna, and commercial banks set up businesses too. 2 large cinemas were provided, one in Gretna, still used today as a bingo hall, and one in Eastriggs, the Carlisle Hall, which later became the main village hall, until it was sadly burnt down in the 1980s. Workers' institutes provided meaningful recreation, leading rooms and billiards for the men at this scene at Eastriggs shows. 2 massive dance halls, the largest in the south of Scotland, were built. The central hall in Eastriggs, on the spot where the local Spar shop now sits, could hold functions for up to 1,000 people. Equally as large, the Border Hall stood at the end of the row of shops in Central Avenue, Gretna. Great dances, concerts and entertainments were put on. So intent on keeping the workers happy with the authorities that no expense or time was spared to build these facilities. The Border Hall was built from start to finish in 39 days. Shifts of workers toiled by day and night by the illumination of a acetylene light after dark. The huge pitch pine floor, which came in 96 sections, was laid in one night. A squad of 60 joiners worked from 4:30 in the afternoon until 9:30 the next morning. In addition, bowling greens and tennis courts were fitted out. Large social and athletic events were held for the workers' entertainment and to raise funds for the war effort and the Red Cross.